You know, it feels like spring in Denver, doesn't it? We haven't had snow on the ground, and we haven't had any of those minus 17-degree mornings. In fact, it's hovering in the mid-60s in February as I film this. And when the weather feels like this, people start thinking, maybe the market's heating up too. But when I pulled the December and January numbers from Smedra, what I saw wasn't a spring surge. It was something else entirely. And if you're thinking about selling, especially if you're doing this solo, this shift matters. If you've watched my recent video about the worst month to sell a house in Denver, we talked about leverage, who has it and when, and this video connects directly to that conversation. Now, let's take a look back at December and then January and what they're actually telling us, because this doesn't feel like our normal spring market that we've seen in the past. This feels like a winter reset. So looking at December's numbers, pendings were down 4.4%, new listings were down 5.5%, closings were down 3.3%, and the median home price dipped slightly to about $569,970. Days on market increased by only 5 days, and there was about 2.3 months supply of homes for sale. All in all, typical for that time of year, very holiday heavy. No panic, but a lot of hesitation. Buyers in the market were taking their time making decisions. They were watching interest rates, they were watching headlines, and they were watching to see what the Fed would do next. And you know, when buyers slow down, they don't disappear, they just start negotiating. So for sellers who were already on the market in December, that environment meant more conversations about price, more inspection asks, and a little longer wait time for just the right buyer to find their home. Not a crash, just less momentum, and not really unexpected at that time of year. Now, let's take a look at January's numbers, because this is where it gets interesting. Pendings jumped 7.9%, so buyers were on the move again. New listings ticked up slightly, about 1.7%, but closings dropped sharply, down 16%. Prices dipped another 0.8% to around $567,000, and days on market climbed again, now averaging about 56 days before a seller saw an offer. And months of supply almost doubled to 4.1 months. Now, that's a little over 16 weeks supply of homes for sale. It's not a spring frenzy. That's inventory building while closings are lagging behind. And here's the important part. This creates opportunity. Can you hear it knocking? Because when days on market increase, prices soften slightly and supply grows, buyers then gain options. More options means less pressure. Less pressure means stronger negotiating power. So if someone is financially ready, watching the rates and positioned well, this kind of market can actually create serious advantage on the buying side. Now the question becomes, well, what does it mean if you're planning to sell and maybe buy at the same time? If you're thinking about selling, this is where you need to slow down and think strategically, because this type of market rewards preparation, not optimism. When inventory builds and homes are sitting 56 days instead of 40-something, pricing becomes precision work. Buyers have more choices. They compare more. They negotiate with more confidence. So if a home is even slightly overpriced or slightly underprepared or slightly unclear of its value, it shows up immediately in longer days on market. And once days on market climbs, buyers start asking the wrong question. Instead of, how do we win this house? They ask, why hasn't it sold? That's a very different energy. Now here's the important nuance. At 4.1 months supply, it's not a crash. It's not even technically a buyer's market yet, though with our historically low numbers over the past few years, it certainly feels a lot more like a buyer's market, doesn't it? But it's a market where leverage is earned, not assumed. The sellers who are doing well right now are pricing correctly from day one. They're preparing thoughtfully. They're understanding their next move before they list. They're not reacting, they're positioning themselves. And this is especially important if you're moving solo, because when you're doing this on your own, the margin for stress feels smaller. You don't want to be negotiating repairs while you're scrambling to find your next home. You don't want to feel rushed because you listed before you were financially clear. You want a plan. And here's where it gets even more interesting. If buyers are gaining advantage right now and supply continues to build into late winter, that could create very favorable window for purchasing before true spring competition shows up. But if everyone waits until April because the weather feels nice and the trees are blooming, inventory spikes, competition spikes, and the leverage shifts again. That's the rhythm of our Denver market. Not dramatic swings, but subtle shifts that matter. So when I call this a winter reset, that's exactly what I mean. This isn't a dramatic spring surge like we saw in 2021. It's the market recalibrate. Inventory is building. Buyers are stepping back in. Rates are still influencing behavior, and that creates space. Space to think, space to plan, space to position yourself instead of rushing. So the real question isn't, is this a good time? The better question is, what's the smartest sequence for me? If you're planning to sell and buy, timing matters, but order matters even more. Some people benefit from selling first and negotiating from a cash position. Others benefit from taking advantage of buyer leverage right now, securing their next home while inventory is higher, then preparing their current home for sale with clarity. In fact, I have a client doing that right now. There isn't just one answer, but there is a right answer for your situation. And this is where being intentional instead of reactive makes all the difference. Because once the true spring energy hits, when listings increase, competition rises, and buyers emotionally lean in, the market will feel faster. Not necessarily stronger, just faster. And fast markets reward the prepared. I'd much rather see you making these decisions now, while the sun is shining and you're thinking clearly, than in April when the house is half staged, the coffee table has mysteriously disappeared, and you can't find the scissors because, oh, yeah, they're already packed. The Denver market's going to move, whether you have a plan or not. The question is, do you want to move with it intentionally or find yourself Googling moving vans at 11:30 at night because things escalated too quickly? I vote for intentional. Hi, if we haven't met yet, my name's Peggy Dursthoff with Live Denver Suburbs, powered by HomeSmart, and I help women over 50 navigate selling and buying without pressure or regret, especially when they're doing it solo. So here's the bottom line. January didn't give us a spring explosion like we saw back in 2021 and 22. It gave us information. It showed us buyers are stepping back in, but cautiously. It shows us inventory is building, and it showed us that preparation matters much more than optimism. If you're even considering a move this year, now is the time to get clear on your sequence. Not rush to market, not to sit on your hands either, but to understand where you would have the strongest footing. Because market shifts quietly before they shift loudly. And people who benefit are usually the ones that are paying attention early. You know, if you'd like help mapping that out in a way that makes sense for your situation, I've put together a simple planning guide below that walks you through the timing questions just like we talked about. And if you're wrestling with the do I buy first or sell first decision in this kind of inventory environment, I've linked that video here so you can keep going. No pressure, just clarity. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.